My name is Cora Hayes. For the better part of a decade, my life was a map of places I'd never been, marked by postmarks from dusty air bases and handwritten letters that smelled of distant lands. I was married to a man who belonged to the sky, Captain Liam Hayes of the United States Air Force. We met in college, two idealistic kids in Port Blossom, Oregon, a city that always smelled of rain and roses. He dreamed of flying. I dreamed of building a life with him on the ground. As it turned out, we did both, just not in the way I'd pictured. Our home was a small, quiet craftsman with a sprawling garden I tended with a devotion that bordered on religious. It was my anchor while he was away, a living, breathing testament to the roots we were trying to put down, even as his work kept pulling him up into the clouds. Love in a military family is a strange and resilient thing. It learns to thrive in the spaces between deployments, to bloom in the hurried 2-week leaves, to find its voice in crackling satellite calls and emails sent from the other side of the world. It's a love that doesn't measure time in anniversaries celebrated together, but in the safe returns, the boots left by the door, the familiar weight in the other half of the bed. Liam and I were good at it. We had our rituals, our unspoken understandings. He'd leave a worn copy of The Little Prince on my pillow before each departure, and I'd pack a small, smooth stone from our garden in his duffel bag, a piece of home he could hold in his hand. The last time I saw him, it was on a misty Port Blossom morning. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and the promise of a spring that felt impossibly far away. He held my face in his hands, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw. "Tend the garden, Cora," he'd whispered, his voice a low rumble. "I'll be home before the peonies bloom." He wasn't. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, a sterile, official voice on the other end of the line delivering a message that shattered my world into a million silent pieces. A training accident over the North Sea. No survivors. Clean, swift, and utterly final. I flew to Ramstein Air Base in Germany for the repatriation ceremony. The world moved around me in a muted blur of starched uniforms, sympathetic glances, and words that meant nothing. I stood on the tarmac, a lone civilian figure in a sea of military precision, and watched them carry my husband, my Liam, home. The funeral was a study in dignified sorrow. The sharp crack of the 21-gun salute, the mournful cry of the bugle-playing taps, the impossibly crisp folds of the American flag as it was passed from a gloved hand to mine. The flag felt heavier than a mountain, a triangle of fabric that contained the entire weight of our shared life and all the years we would never have. The flight back to Port Blossom was a long, hollow journey through the stratosphere. I sat by the window, watching the endless expanse of white clouds, feeling a profound and terrifying numbness. Grief is a fog, and I was lost in its center, unable to see the shore. As the plane began its descent towards the Pacific Northwest, a practical thought pierced through the haze. I needed a ride home from the airport. My car was still parked at our house miles away. I pulled out my phone, my fingers feeling clumsy and slow. I opened the group chat named Family, a chat that included my mother, Beatrice, my older brother, Julian, and his wife, Sophie. I typed a simple, unadorned message, devoid of the drama churning inside me. "Flight lands at 3:15 p.m. At PDX. Can someone pick me up?" I hesitated for a moment, my thumb hovering over the send button. I thought about adding more, about explaining the crushing weight of the last few days, about saying the words "I just buried my husband, and I can't bear to be alone right now." But I didn't. We were family. They knew where I'd been. They knew why. Surely that was enough. I pressed send, the little blue bubble floating into the digital ether just as the flight attendant announced our final approach. The reply came almost instantly, a buzz against my palm that felt jarringly loud in the quiet of my grief. It was Julian. "Sorry, Cora. Tied up with a client showing. Big potential sale. Try a rideshare." My breath caught in my throat. A client showing. I stared at the words, their casual dismissal a small, sharp sting. Before I could even process it, another message appeared, this one from my mother. "Dearest, why didn't you arrange this sooner? You know how frantic Julian's schedule is. A little planning goes a long way. No, how are you? No, we're so sorry for your loss. No, we're on our way. Just a gentle scolding, a critique of my logistical foresight in the immediate aftermath of burying the love of my life. A cold, clean blade of practicality, slicing through the last thread of hope I didn't even know I was holding. I looked out the window as the plane broke through the clouds, revealing the familiar green patchwork of Oregon below. The fog in my mind began to clear, replaced by a terrible, lucid silence. It wasn't the silence of sorrow anymore. It was the silence of realization. You spend your life believing family is a harbor, a safe port in any storm. But sometimes, you return from the sea, battered and broken, only to find they've pulled up the dock and turned off the lighthouse. My fingers moved across the screen, my reply as simple and quiet as my initial request. No worries. I'll figure it out. That was it. No argument. No pleading. No guilt. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of my pain. I closed my eyes and leaned my head against the cool glass of the window. I had survived the last 72 hours. I would survive this. When the plane touched down, I didn't shed a tear. I gathered my small carry-on, the folded flag held tight against my chest like a shield, and I walked off that plane alone. The Portland International Airport was a symphony of joyful chaos. Families hugging, children shrieking with delight, lovers reuniting with long, cinematic kisses. I moved through it all like a ghost, an invisible observer in a world that was suddenly too bright, too loud, too full of life. I bypassed the baggage claim, my single suitcase from Germany having been checked through with military assistance. I followed the signs for passenger pickup, my coat pulled tight against the damp chill that seeped in through the automatic doors. I stood on the curb, the gray Oregon sky weeping a soft, persistent drizzle. Cars pulled up, doors opened, people were enveloped in warm embraces. For a moment, a wave of profound loneliness washed over me, so powerful it almost buckled my knees. I had faced a military funeral alone, but this felt like a different kind of abandonment. This was personal. Just as I reached for my phone to open the Uber app, a sleek, dark sedan pulled silently to the curb in front of me. The passenger door opened, and a man in a crisp Air Force dress uniform stepped out. He was tall, with kind eyes and a quiet strength that seemed to emanate from him. I recognized him from the ceremony. Master Sergeant Garza, Liam's wing commander. Mrs. Hayes, he said, his voice soft but firm. We have you. Behind him, two more airmen, a young man and woman, emerged from the back of the car. They didn't say a word, just stood at a respectful distance, their posture a silent promise of protection. Tears I hadn't allowed myself to cry pricked at the back of my eyes. Master Sergeant, I managed, my voice hoarse. You didn't have to do this. Captain Hayes was one of ours, he replied simply, taking my carry-on bag from my trembling hand. That makes you one of ours too. We don't leave our people behind. His words, so simple and so profound, were the anchor I had been so desperately searching for. He held the door open for me, and as I slid into the warm, quiet interior of the car, I noticed a local news van parked a short distance away, a cameraman filming our interaction. Someone must have tipped them off. For a fleeting second, I felt a flash of irritation, an invasion of my private grief. Then a different feeling took its place. A quiet resolve. Master Sergeant Garza got into the driver's seat. A reporter asked for a comment, ma'am. I told him you weren't speaking to the press, but that we were here on behalf of the 142nd Fighter Wing to escort you home. I nodded, my mind working quickly. Before we go, I said, my voice clearer now, do you have a piece of paper and a pen? One of the young airmen in the back passed me a small notepad and a pen. My hand was surprisingly steady as I wrote. I kept it short, not a cry for pity, but a statement of truth. In the quiet moments of deepest sorrow, you discover who your family truly is. It's not always the people you share blood with, but the people who show up. I am eternally grateful to the men and women of the U.S. Air Force who showed up today. CH. I folded the note and handed it to Master Sergeant Garza. Would you mind giving this to that reporter? It's the only statement I'll be making. He took it with a solemn nod. Of course, Mrs. Hayes. As we pulled away from the curb, leaving the noise and bustle of the airport behind, I didn't look back. The car moved smoothly through the city, the windshield wipers keeping a steady rhythm against the rain. I held the folded flag in my lap, its sharp corners digging into my palms. I was not escorted by the family I was born into, but I was not alone. I was surrounded by a different kind of family, one forged in loyalty, honor, and the simple, sacred act of showing up. That evening, I sat in the stillness of my empty house. The garden outside was dark and damp, the peonies still tight, sleeping buds. I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat in Liam's favorite armchair, the silence a heavy blanket. My phone remained dark. The family group chat was a graveyard. Around 10 p.m., my phone buzzed with a notification from a friend. Cora, are you seeing this? Channel 8. With a sense of detached curiosity, I found the remote and turned on the television. The local news broadcast was just wrapping up. The anchor, a woman with a gentle face, was speaking. And in a moving story from Portland International today, a local military widow returned home from her husband's funeral overseas. She was met not by relatives, but by a full-honor escort from her late husband's unit. The footage filled the screen. There I was, a small figure in black, standing on the rainy curb. The camera zoomed in as Master Sergeant Garza took my bag, as the other two airmen stood like sentinels behind me. The image was powerful in its quiet dignity. Me, looking lost but not broken, flanked by the unwavering support of the uniform Liam had been so proud to wear. The widow, who asked for privacy, declined to be interviewed. The anchor continued, but she left this handwritten note for our reporter on the scene. My handwriting filled the screen, clear and steady against the white paper. The anchor read my words aloud. In the quiet moments of deepest sorrow, you discover who your family truly is. It's not always the people you share blood with, but the people who show up. The camera panned back to the shot of me getting into the car, the sedan pulling away into the rain. The segment was less than a minute long, but it was devastatingly effective. It told a complete story without a single accusation. It was just the truth, presented with grace. In his sleek condo across town, I knew my brother Julian was watching. I could picture him pausing, his wine glass halfway to his lips. In her perfectly decorated house in the West Hills, my mother was surely seeing it, too. I could imagine the sharp intake of breath, the flush of shame creeping up her neck. They had wanted me to plan better. They had been busy. They had sent a text. And I, in return, had sent a broadcast. The silence from their end was no longer just an absence of communication. It was the sound of consequence. The 24 hours following the newscast were a study in silence. The family group chat remained dormant, a digital monument to their failure. But the silence from the rest of the world was a different story. It was filled with tentative, gentle outreach. An email from a former professor. A text from a high school friend I hadn't spoken to in years. A pot of homemade chicken soup left on my doorstep with a simple, anonymous note, "Thinking of you." The first crack in my family's wall of silence came from my sister-in-law, Sophie. A private message, not in the group chat. "Was that you I just saw on PBN 8? I read her message and felt nothing. No anger, no desire to explain. I simply didn't reply. What was there to say? "Yes, that was me. The woman your husband was too busy to pick up from the airport." The silence was a more powerful answer than any words I could have written. Then came the public posturing. My mother, Beatrice, whose social life was a carefully curated performance, was the first to try and rewrite the narrative. She posted an old photograph on her Facebook page. It was me and Julian as children, maybe 6 and 8 years old, squinting into the sun at a 4th of July picnic, our small hands clutching miniature American flags. Her caption was a masterpiece of passive aggression. "Some bonds are forever. Family is everything." So proud of our brave men and women in uniform and the families who support them. I saw it because a cousin had tagged me. I didn't like it. I didn't comment. I didn't have to. The court of public opinion, it turned out, was swifter and more brutal than I could have imagined. The top comment, left by a woman I'd never met, appeared within minutes. Is this the daughter you couldn't be bothered to pick up from the airport after she buried her hero husband? That's not what I call support. The comment was liked dozens of times. Then hundreds. My mother, who meticulously pruned any hint of negativity from her online presence, was suddenly facing a tidal wave of it. She couldn't delete the comments fast enough. The photo, meant to be a testament to her flawless family values, had become a digital pillory. Next, it was Julian's turn. He sent a text directly to my phone, a single, infuriating line. Didn't realize it would be such a big deal. You should have told us it was serious. I stared at the words, a humorless laugh escaping my lips. It was serious? As if my husband's death and burial were a casual event that I had failed to properly categorize on a scale of importance for him. As if my grief required a certain decibel level to be worthy of his time. As if the onus was on me, the shattered widow, to manage his perception of my tragedy. I typed and deleted a dozen angry replies. I wanted to rage, to scream, to ask him what part of "I just buried my husband" sounded casual. But I didn't. Anger felt like a currency they no longer deserved. Instead, I wrote back a simple, quiet sentence that held up a mirror to his own choices. I made my needs clear. You made your choice. I didn't add an exclamation point or a single emoji. It was a statement of fact, as cold and clean as his initial rejection. The story, however, was no longer just mine. The local news station called again. The producer's voice was warm, respectful. "Ms. Hayes," she said, "the response to our story has been overwhelming. People were so moved. We were wondering if you'd be willing to sit down for a follow-up interview. To share your story, in your own words." My first instinct was to say no. I didn't want the attention. I didn't want to be a spectacle. I wanted to retreat into my garden and my grief and be left alone. I wanted to hide. But then I thought of Liam. He had never been a man who hid from the truth. "Don't let silence win," he used to say, a quote from some movie we both loved. I realized my silence now wouldn't be protecting me. It would be protecting them. It would allow them to believe their version of the story, that this was all a misunderstanding, that I was being overly dramatic. "Yes," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I'll do it. Not for revenge. Not for sympathy. But for the record. For every person who had ever been made to feel that their pain was an inconvenience." The interview was taped in a small, quiet studio. There were no bright, glaring lights, just soft, diffused lighting that made the space feel intimate and safe. The anchor from the original broadcast, a man named Daniel Park, sat across from me. He had kind, intelligent eyes. He began gently. "Cora, thank you for being here. Can you just tell us what it was like for you landing back home?" I took a deep breath, the air filling my lungs, and I spoke the truth I had been holding in my chest for days. "I buried my husband with full military honors," I said, my voice even. "And I came home to be met with silence." The air in the studio grew still. I recounted the story, simply and factually. The text message sent from the plane. The cold, logistical replies. The walk through the airport. I didn't use my mother's or my brother's names. I didn't have to. This was bigger than them. "My husband's unit taught me what true family is," I continued, looking directly at the camera. "They showed me that it's not about obligation or blood ties. It's about presence. It's about showing up when it's hard, when it's messy, and when it matters most. Blood doesn't make you family. Loyalty does. Love does." The segment aired that evening during the primetime news hour. It was 6 minutes long. Just my face, my voice, and my story. No dramatic music, no tearful montage. Just raw, quiet truth. The response was immediate and immense. My inbox was flooded with messages from strangers. Other military spouses, Gold Star families, veterans, but also ordinary people's sons and daughters of aging parents, siblings who felt unseen, anyone who had ever felt the sting of conditional love. They shared their own stories of being left at metaphorical airports. They said, "You made me feel less alone." The next morning, I checked the family group chat. My mother had left the group without a word. My brother had changed the name from Family Red Heart to simply Group. I didn't leave. I didn't delete it. I simply archived it. I moved it to a place where I would no longer see it, a digital acknowledgement that a chapter of my life had closed. You can't beg people to be who they should have been all along. You can't build a home on a foundation of their absence. You can only accept the truth of what is, and then you have to build your own shelter. The story began to build a life of its own, far beyond my control. It started with small, tangible things. A letter appeared in my mailbox, the handwriting careful and elegant. Inside, a woman wrote, "I saw you on the news." My son, SGT. Leo Carter, was killed in Kandahar in 2011. I know the feeling of that empty driveway. Thank you for your courage. You have given a voice to so many of us. The news clip was shared by local veterans organizations. A prominent blog for military families wrote a long post about it, calling it a lesson in the sacred duty of showing up. Flowers began appearing on my porch, left by neighbors and strangers alike. Bouquets of lilies, pots of orchids, and one day, a simple, beautiful bundle of peonies, just beginning to open. The card simply said, "For your garden." From a fellow Air Force wife. A few weeks after the interview, a young woman from a local community college reached out. Her father was a retired Marine. She and her friends, moved by my story, had organized a small candlelight vigil at the Port Blossom Waterfront Park to honor fallen service members and the families they leave behind. They wanted to know if I would attend. I was hesitant, but I felt a pull to go, not as a guest of honor, but as a quiet participant. I went alone, wearing a simple dark coat, my hair tucked into a beanie. I stood at the back of the crowd, watching as dozens of people gathered, their faces illuminated by the soft, flickering candlelight. They were young and old, in uniform and in civilian clothes. A community of souls united by a shared understanding of sacrifice. A young man with a guitar began to sing a soft, acoustic version of a folk song. His voice was gentle and clear, carrying over the quiet murmur of the crowd and the sound of the Willamette River flowing nearby. I will carry you home." A lump formed in my throat, thick and painful. I felt a hand on my arm and turned to see an older woman with kind, wrinkled eyes. "Are you Cora?" she whispered. I nodded. "My husband served in Vietnam," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "No one ever met him at the airport." "Thank you." She squeezed my arm, a moment of profound, unspoken connection that was worth more than 1,000 apologies. As the vigil wound down, I scanned the crowd one last time. And then I saw him. On the far edge of the gathering, half hidden in the shadows of a large oak tree, stood my brother, Julian. He was alone, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his expensive coat, his head bowed. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the crowd, at the candles, at the quiet, powerful community that had formed in the space his absence had created. He saw it all. He saw the way strangers had come together to carry a burden he and my mother had refused to touch. He didn't approach me. He just watched for a long time, then turned and walked away into the darkness. The next morning, a text from him appeared on my phone. No greeting, just the words, "I didn't think it would get this big." I looked at his message and thought about the community I had witnessed, the love I had felt from total strangers. I thought about the bridge of support they had built for me. And then I thought about the wall he and my mother had built between us. My reply was quiet and final. "That's the thing about a vacuum, Julian. Something always rushes in to fill it. You and Mom left a space. A community filled it." This story was no longer about them. It was for the woman who had left the peonies on my porch. It was for the man whose son died in Kandahar. It was for every person who had ever felt alone in their grief, and for the people who showed them they weren't. In the weeks that followed, the letters and emails didn't stop. They were full of stories, of pain, of gratitude. I realized I was sitting at the center of something powerful, a collective ache that had been given a name. Being a symbol was one thing, but a symbol doesn't cook a meal for a grieving spouse or offer to watch their children while they make funeral arrangements. I didn't want to be a story people told. I wanted to build something that would change the ending for the next person. The idea came to me one morning as I was tending my garden. The peonies Liam would never see were in full, glorious bloom, their heavy pink heads nodding in the gentle breeze. I thought of a harbor, a safe place for ships to come in from a storm. And so, the Harbor Project was born. It started as a simple website I built myself, a place for volunteers to sign up and for returning military spouses to request support. Not charity, but solidarity. The mission was simple: no one comes home alone. We would offer airport pickups, a fully stocked refrigerator, a list of resources for grief counseling, and a dedicated care team to check in, run errands, or just sit in silence with someone who needed it. The response was like a wildfire. Volunteers signed up from all over Oregon and Washington within the first week. A local car dealership donated a gently used passenger van. A catering company offered to provide the first week of meals for every family we helped. It was astonishing. It was beautiful. 2 weeks after we launched, we had our first welcome. A young Army wife named Hannah was flying into PDX, returning from her husband's burial at Arlington. I organized a team of 4 volunteers. We didn't wear matching t-shirts or carry flashy signs. We just stood at the bottom of the escalator at arrivals, and when she appeared, looking small and lost, we were there. I held up a simple, hand-painted sign that said, "Welcome home, Hannah. We've got you." Her face crumpled in relief, and she fell into our arms. A news photographer, who had been tipped off by one of our volunteers, captured the moment. That photo, 4 strangers embracing a grieving widow at the airport, went viral. The Harbor Project was suddenly everywhere. It was featured on national news blogs and morning talk shows. We were flooded with donations and volunteers from across the country. And then, one afternoon, my phone rang. The caller ID read Beatrice. My mother. I stared at the screen, my heart a steady, even drumbeat in my chest. I felt no anxiety, no anger. Just a quiet sense of distance. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. Her message was just as I'd expected. Her voice, usually so controlled and crisp, was watery and unsteady. "Cora, darling, I saw the story about your project. It's wonderful. I didn't know how to help before. I didn't think you'd want us there. We made a mistake. Please call me." I listened to the message once, then I pressed delete. It wasn't an act of malice. It was an act of peace. An apology is a bandage, but I had already healed the wound myself. Her regret wasn't for me, it was for her. It was the uncomfortable realization that her daughter had needed her, and she had failed. I didn't need her apology to validate my pain, and I no longer needed her presence to feel whole. A few days later, an email notification popped up. A donation to the Harbor Project. It was for $500, made anonymously. But the donor's email address, briefly visible in the confirmation receipt forwarded to me, was one I recognized. It was Julian's work email. I didn't reply. I didn't acknowledge it. The money would go to help another family. His guilt was his own to carry. This wasn't about forgiveness or retribution anymore. It was about moving forward. You don't burn bridges, I realized. Sometimes you just stand on the shore and watch as the current carries you somewhere new, and you start building stronger, better bridges there, with people who know how to build with you. They called it a quiet revolution in the feature article in the Oregonian. The photo was of me, not at the airport, but at a Harbor Project welcome event. My arm was around a young woman whose eyes were red-rimmed, but whose back was straight. She was clutching a folded flag to her chest, and I was looking at her with a sad, knowing smile. The caption read, "From Grief to Ground Crew, How Cora Hayes is Changing the Way We Welcome Our Heroes' Families Home." The day the article ran, I received a text from a number I didn't have saved, but I knew who it was. It was a screenshot of the article. Nothing else. No words, no explanation. Just the image, a silent offering from my mother. A white flag. That evening, I was the keynote speaker at the annual Gold Star Family Memorial Banquet held in the Port Blossom Memorial Rose Garden. The air was fragrant with the scent of thousands of roses, and the setting sun cast a golden glow over the proceedings. As I stood at the podium, I looked out at the rows of faces. Faces of parents, spouses, and children who knew the true cost of freedom. They were my people. This was my family now. I didn't speak with bitterness. I didn't tell the story of the airport as an accusation. I told it as a genesis. I came home to an empty curb, I said, my voice carrying in the still evening air. But I didn't stay alone for long. Because my husband, Liam, taught me something. He wrote it in one of his last letters. He said, Cora, if anything ever happens to me, don't let the silence win. Find the music. For a while, all I could hear was silence. But then other people started showing up. And they brought the music with them. They are the ones who make up the song of support that is the Harbor Project. I talked about Liam's laugh, the way he'd hum off-key when he was fixing something, the calluses on his hands. I made him real for them. And I ended with a simple truth. We can't stop the storms from coming. But we can be the harbor. We can be the lighthouse. We can be the ones who stand on the shore and say, welcome home. We've got you. When I stepped down from the stage, to a standing ovation that felt both humbling and overwhelming, a woman in a string of pearls and a Chanel suit grabbed my hand. Her eyes were wet with tears. My niece, she said, her voice thick. She was your second welcome. You have no idea what you did for our family. You saved her. I just held her hand, the connection between us more real than any conversation. As the crowd began to mingle, I looked towards the edge of the garden, near the old stone archway. And I saw them. My mother and my brother, standing together under a weeping willow. They hadn't come in. They hadn't announced themselves. They were just watching from a distance, two silhouettes against the fading light. I met my mother's gaze across the lawn. There was a universe of unspoken things in that look: regret, pride, a sorrowful distance. I gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Not of forgiveness, not of invitation, but of acknowledgement. I see you. And I am okay. Then I turned away, back to the people who had gathered around me, back to the community that had risen from the ashes of my private grief. I used to think closure was a conversation, a final reckoning where the people who hurt you finally understood. But I was wrong. Closure wasn't an apology I received. It was a piece I had built myself. They were watching my new life from the sidelines, and the most stunning realization was that I was no longer watching them back. Later that night, I was in my kitchen, the heart of my quiet house. I was packing a Harbor Project welcome tote for a spouse arriving the next day, a warm blanket, a gift card for groceries, a thermos of tea, and a handwritten note. The house was calm. The silence was no longer heavy or empty. It was peaceful. It was mine. The doorbell rang. It was two of my volunteers, a young couple, both veterans, dropping off donations they'd collected. The wife, a woman named Nina, gave me a hug that was warm and real, the kind of hug that doesn't ask for anything in return. You're amazing, Cora, she said, smiling. And in that moment, I understood. I never replied to my mother's last text. I never acknowledged my brother's donation. I never reopened that archived group chat. Because some people are a part of your history, and others are a part of your destiny. My destiny was here, in this quiet house, with these good people, building harbors for others. I will never forget landing at that airport, feeling utterly alone. But I am grateful for it. It was the moment that taught me the most important lesson of my life. You don't rebuild your life by waiting for the people who broke it to hand you the pieces. You rebuild by becoming the architect of your own future. You learn to be your own foundation. And one day, you look up and realize you've built something so strong and beautiful that the people who left you in the rubble can only stand at a distance and marvel at what you created without them. And you? You'll already be walking forward. Not alone. Never again.